We're now moving on to Ghislaine Gendron. She's from Canada, feminist. She's a member of the Committee on Surrogacy and Pour les Droits des Femmes Québec, PDF Quebec, and she is also coordinator of Women's Human Rights Campaign Quebec. Thank you so much, Ghislaine, and over to you.
Okay, so I would like to take the opportunity to underline how much the contribution of Women's Human Rights Campaign and Joe, Jocelyn, Bernadette, Sheila, and all the women who volunteer for WHRC are important for women around the world. And I am very honored to share a panel with Marie-Josèphe de Villiers, Maria Binetti, and Renate Klein. So Joe presented me. I would say that I became interested in the subject of surrogacy through my involvement with feminist organizations. And I would like to add that I'm not a legal expert. Everything I am sharing with you is the result of the researches done by Michel Sirois, an anthropologist, and myself, both members of Pour les Droits des Femmes du Québec. So surrogacy is a matter of a woman giving birth to a child by contract, altruistic or commercial contract. The subject of surrogacy is often introduced through images of a child's smile and heartbreaking testimonies of infertile couples who are deprived of access to the experience and joy of parenthood. These sufferings are unfortunately very real and sometimes intense, and they can lead to persistent dramas that shape the lives of women and men. Very rarely, though, on the other hand, we hear about the reasons why surrogacy is prohibited in many countries, and we hear very little about the reason of this prohibition. So radical feminists object to the use of surrogate mother as a means of compensating for infertility, whether it has a biological or social cause. It is perhaps useful to remind that surrogacy is not a cure for infertility, as Marie-Josèphe pointed out. So I would like to talk about the Canadian law, because in Canada, only an altruistic surrogacy is permitted since the 2004 Canadian Assisted Human Reproduction Act. So in Canada, the altruistic offer has created the demand. This is very important to understand that. And the demand has turned into a need. And the need is slowly shifting to human rights issues. This is where we are now. Predictably, the growing demand has created a shortage. In a market logic, when there is an altruistic supply, the demand for surrogate mothers obviously grows rapidly. So gradually, women are no longer numerous enough to volunteer to bear someone else's child for free. So this is what is happening today in Canada and around the world. The payment of surrogate mothers and the sale of human genetic material is rapidly emerging as the solution to fill the shortage and above all to increase profits. So the ethical considerations are being swept out of public discourse. So yet the Canadian Assisted Human Reproduction Act stated in its paragraph 2.2F that the commercialization of the reproductive function of women and men and the exploitation of women, men and children for commercial purpose raises health and ethical issues that justify its prohibition. So now, introduced in February 2020, the Canadian Senate Bill S216 seeks to remove this subsection and seeks to allow for the payment of surrogate mothers and the sale of human genetic material. But you will see that it is already there in Canada. In Canada, surrogacy can be resumed by the sentence, "It is women's altruism at the service of an industry." So gradually, since 2004, a true market of surrogacy has emerged in Canada based on women's altruism. So Marie-Josèphe talked about that. We have agencies, stakeholders have joined the process, fertility clinics, health technicians, embryologists, lawyers have joined the agencies to draft contract. Banks have offered loan services and insurers have offered their services. So it's really an industry. A successful surrogacy market is now flourishing in Canada. But in an altruistic surrogacy market, all these people are paid. None of them is doing it by altruism, except the woman who is bearing the child and taking all the risk to her physical health, and who agrees to renounce her fundamental rights by contract. Most of all, she renounces to her filiation rights on the child that she bears for 9 months. I think that we can really indeed speak of altruism of women at the service of an industry. So we are on the path of commercialization surrogacy in Canada. As they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. If you still have doubts about the commercialization of the human body, the CanAm Cryo Service Canadian company's website displayed on your screen may take them away. It may sound ironic, keeping in mind that the sale of breast milk and blood is prohibited in Canada. In Canada, only the choice of the child's sex is prohibited, but you can choose the child's ethnicity, hair color, eye color, age, and add your purchase on the small basket in the shape of a child's baby carriage at the top of the website. This is where they are now. So ironically, it was while reading publications of many proponents of the commercialization of surrogacy that I discovered information revealing the behind-the-scenes practice of the so-called altruistic industry. I learned that Canada had become a prime destination for international reproductive tourism, and that some Canadian altruistic surrogate mothers were in fact paid to carry children for foreign sponsoring parents. I share with you some numbers. In 2016, the surrogacy agencies, they call themselves consultants, reported by their own estimate that there would be 3 to 40 times as many sponsoring parents as there are available surrogate mothers. They are talking about Canadian sponsoring parents. We understand by these numbers that these agencies are lamenting the shortage of surrogate mothers. Accordingly to studies written by proponents of commercial surrogacy, sponsoring Canadian parents must resign themselves to seek surrogacy services in other countries, often at a greater cost and inconvenience, or with additional legal and medical risk. By higher cost, proponents are probably referring to the United States and to countries like Ukraine and Russia when talking about legal risk. For medical risk, they may be referring to poorer countries. The founder of the agency, Canadian Fertility Consulting, confided in a 2018 CBC interview that her business has not stopped growing since 2014. From 300 surrogate mothers on which she relied in 2017, she passes to 500 in 1 year. How can we explain such an increase of altruism in Ontario? It was by reading the report of a conference made by the University of Manitoba law professor, Mrs. Karen Busby, who also advocates for the commercialization of surrogacy, that we were able to find some clues to explain this phenomenon. A columnist of the Canadian newspaper, the Globe and Mail, reported information of a conference that she attended. The conference was given by Mrs. Busby at the annual meeting of the Canadian Fertility and Andrology Society. She reported a startling statistic: 45 of the 102 babies born to surrogates mother in British Columbia in 2017 were destined to foreign sponsoring parents. It is a wonder knowing that agency complains about shortage of surrogate mother for Canadian sponsoring parents. So according to Mrs. Busby, with Canadian criminal code law that forbids paying surrogate mother does not apply to offshore financial transactions. She stated at this conference, and she's a law professor, and in her publications, that foreign sponsors, parents can offer money openly as long as the money changes hands outside Canadian territory. So Canadian surrogate mothers would be legally allowed to accept this money. So the surge of surrogate mothers at the Canadian Fertility Consulting may be explained by this interpretation of the Canadian law. I have tried to have this information confirmed by the loyal Canadian Mounted Police litigation experts, but they refuse to answer my question. Even knowing that information, we still think that is not enough to make Canada a magnet for international reproductive tourism. As you may think, there are many other elements that explain this particular craze for the Canadian flavor. So let's see what those advantages are. Gradually, former international low-cost destinations such as India, Thailand, Nepal, Mexico have either closed access to surrogacy to foreigners following high-profile scandals or have banned the practice. How come that on the international scene, Canada remains in competition with countries such as Russia, Ukraine, Georgia, and some states in the United States, which allow both surrogacy and foreign participation in surrogacy? The first advantage of Canada is the free quality medical care. On this point, Canada has a clear advantage over all others. It offers very good quality and free medical care financed by Canadian taxpayers for the mother and the child. And of course, these services are for foreign parents, sponsoring parents. Knowing that perinatal care for a child born prematurely can be as much as 90,000 Canadian dollars, one quickly understand that this can be a tempting advantage. For comparison, a sponsoring parents who contact a surrogate mother in California through the agency will have to assume this bill, in addition to the medical care provided to the surrogate mother during a pregnancy. So that was the first advantage. The second precious advantage is the citizenship and Canadian passport for the newborn. According to Section 3.1 of the Canadian Citizenship Act, a child born in Canada automatically acquires Canadian citizenship. This is obviously an advantage that can be attractive to many foreign citizens, especially China, which seems to represent an important market in the surrogacy industry. China banned the use of surrogacy in 2001 for fear that Chinese women in need would be exploited. So in 2016, Chinese authorities relaxed their laws on the one-child policy. This relaxation has led an upsurge in surrogacy requests on the desire of elderly couples who are well past childbearing age. So rising incomes and high infertility rates attributed to pollution have also contributed to the increase in demand. Third advantage, its exchange rate. If the cost of a Canadian surrogacy is not competitive with those practiced in Russia or Ukraine, its exchange rate is certainly advantageous over its southern neighbors, the United States. The non-discrimination. Canada is one of the very few countries that allows access to surrogacy to foreign parents in a non-discriminatory manner. More clearly, it does not limit access to single or gay men, which is an important attraction and advantage, since this clientele represents 40% of the demand of surrogacy today. The desire to have children from his own genes, as Marie-Josèphe talked about, is well represented by this picture. You can see that every children has the same gene than the father on this picture of a couple of English gay men who made sure to inseminate a Canadian surrogate mother with 2 eggs from another woman, each egg having been fertilized in Las Vegas by each of the future fathers. Knowing all this, why do many Canadian sponsoring parents have to travel abroad to access surrogacy? Well, there are 2 reasons. The cost in Ukraine or Georgia, for example, the cost of surrogacy is not comparable with a Canadian surrogacy for all the reasons you can imagine. And the second one is more interesting. It's the shortage of Canadian surrogate mothers. Since Canadian sponsoring parents cannot avoid Canadian law, as foreigners can, altruistic surrogate mothers are increasingly offering their service to foreign parents, which increase the shortage of Canadian sponsors parents. The absurd laws of market applies. The industry eager to maximize its profit and sees this clientele diverted from its local market. It is demanding the same competitive advantage for its local market, the Canadian sponsoring parents. Therefore, they make huge pressure on senators and politicians to commercialize surrogacy. So in our, I'm finishing with this. In her article titled "How Canada Became an International Surrogacy Destination," the author, Mrs. Matlock, closed with that declaration of the Canadian Fertility and Andrology Society. I will leave you on that one. In fact, the new president of the Canadian Fertility and Andrology Society, as well as the CEO of the leading gestational agency for the rest of the country, announced that they will be in London to promote Canada as a destination of choice for surrogacy. Just wanted to add that it's more and more shifting to a human rights issue. And I think it is important that to say that it's a deviation of the sense of a human right, because there is not such a thing as a right to become parents or have a children, but there is a right for children to have parents. So the inverse, you know, the rights. The rights is for the children in adoption. It's the right for children to have a parent, not the opposite. Now it's the interest of the adults that are considered when they are talking about human rights. They're talking about rights, about in fact, it's an interest of parents or adulthood, and they never talk about the right of the children. It's always swept out.
This is from Tracy Allard. She says 40% of clients in Canada are gay. Is there a percentage known around the world?
This is a very big problem because the data are very hard to get. The clinics, they keep their data. So in order to know what's the percentage of gay men, I relied on a study of the law professor that they succeed in having a study for a little clinic in British Columbia. So, but otherwise they keep their numbers. We don't have access. No, the pressure is, it's the opposite. The pressure is to get access, to open it. We have, in Quebec, it's different from the rest of the provinces, and we have pressure to change our civil law in order to permit more, and it's propaganda. It's always propaganda in the mainstream media. So we hear about the opposite, in fact.